Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I'm Alan. We also, in addition, have the rest of the Filecoin Green team here. There's Caitlin here, and Motza, and Orion here. So we're all around. So if you have questions on anything we're doing, find us or any of these fine people.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I think I wanted to start out by saying we met up in Paris yesterday, and Marc, you said this is the perfect time to be giving a talk on sustainability. So can you tell us about the disaster that's going on outside?
Yeah, totally. Hey, everybody. My name's Marc. Awesome to be here. And actually, before we get into this, the events team killed it once again. Just want to give a shout out to them. Unbelievable place.
So good.
In Paris with AC, and obviously, as we've just mentioned, I mean, who's been hot this week? Yeah? A little bit, maybe, today, as you're walking around? Well, you're not alone, and I'm sorry to break this news to you, but you might want to get used to it. This is the new normal. Just today, in the UK, they set an all-time record, breached 39 degrees for the first time ever. And I don't know if it's happened in the last hour or so, but we were just approaching 41 degrees here in Paris, which also has never been achieved before. Just last month in Spain, over 30,000 hectares were burned to the ground. That's 75,000 acres that were burned to the ground. And really what all of these recent events really highlight in my mind is exactly what the climate scientists have been telling us for years now. Right, the United Nations Environmental Program, which is stationed here in Paris, they release a landmark report every year titled the Emissions Gap Report, assessing how sustainability initiatives and policies around the world are mapping to our dire need to decarbonize the global economy. And in last year's Emissions Gap Report, 2021, they highlighted, actually the title of the report was called The Heat Is On. And they highlighted that climate change is no longer a future problem. It is a now problem. And another landmark report released from the Interplanetary, not Interplanetary, that's us, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, their landmark report, the assessment report, which is released every 7 years, this year being the release of their 6th assessment report. The first version, or the executive summary of the report was released back in March, and it went on to further demonstrate what the emissions gap report was saying that the extreme weather events that we've all been experiencing over the recent years are directly correlated to the buildup of anthropogenic greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And these two reports were recently called a code red for society, or for humanity, by the United Nations Secretary General. And really what they state is that, we have no other choice. We must drastically and rapidly decrease the emissions in our atmosphere at a scale and speed never before achieved. And what this imperative really, really demands of us is that we, as a global society, countries, corporations, and individual consumers drive collective actions towards decarbonization efforts, once again, at a scale and speed never before seen. And, well, I should say that not all is dire. There are signs of hope. Governments, local, regional, and national, are starting to mandate climate risk disclosures for corporations, and some policymakers are even going a step further in implementing carbon adjustment mechanisms on imports and exports across national boundaries. Furthermore, corporate actors are taking pretty aggressive stances. They're starting to implement more rigorous and stringent environmental policies into their corporate actions. Financiers are starting to ask what the environmental impact of corporate operations are, and even individual consumers are starting to say, okay, what is the environmental impact of this product or this service that I'm about to purchase? So that's all great, but underlying all those questions, or all those policy pledges and corporate actions, are two crucial questions. Will this be enough, and how do we track real progress? And really what we talk about a lot is the potential for blockchain networks and crypto primitives to drive collective action towards reducing emissions and showcasing industry-wide decarbonization, and hopefully, creating new demand for clean technologies to at least mitigate or alleviate some of these, very dire climate scenarios that we're seeing unfold right now and on into the future.
And I think that really brings us to something that we think a lot about in Filecoin Green, which is how is crypto going to help us solve this, right? Why do we need Web3 tools in order to understand what our impacts are across the economy, on the climate, and on natural systems in general, and to take action to reduce and mitigate those? And one of the frames I think of a lot for this is that Coase's theory of the firm, if you're familiar with this, is this idea that firms exist, so companies exist, centralization in the economy exists as an information crutch. So the boundary between the interior of a firm or a company and the exterior of a firm has to do with what types of agreements you're allowed to make. Right? So firms make simple agreements with other firms because they don't trust the people in those other firms. So they can just pass really simple information between. But they can make very complex, long time-bounded agreements like employment contracts within a firm because there's this presumption of trust, right? And the economy is built on that, right? It's built on this informational crutch. And what we have in Web3 now for the first time is this whole range of tools and governance structures that are going to allow us to pass information that's not just price signals from company to company, right? So Filecoin Green is dedicated to building that, right? Filecoin Green is dedicated to building the Web3 native tools that we need in order to understand what environmental impacts we have within a project or within a company, and to allow us to pass that information from company to company, from project to project, to really understand what our impacts are, how we can make decisions, so buy different products, for example, to reduce those impacts, and then to pass that information along in a verifiable way. And so we started this by focusing on the Filecoin network itself. So Filecoin Green came about a year ago after the network had launched and been growing really quickly for a couple months. People started asking, how much energy does this network use? And what can we do to reduce the environmental impacts of Filecoin electricity use? And so we spent quite a while trying to understand if you have a proof on the Filecoin blockchain, and this proof allows you to see that a storage provider, so a node in the Filecoin network, has stored a certain amount of data over a certain amount of time, how can we take those proofs from the network on-chain and translate those into proofs of energy use? So we launched the Filecoin.energy dashboard, which allows you to see, based on information from the Filecoin blockchain, how much energy is being used to store files over time. So then we took the next step, which is to say, okay, we understand how much energy these individual nodes are using. What can we do to connect those nodes to renewable energy? And so also on the Filecoin dashboard, if a Filecoin node you're looking up, so you can dial in a node, say you're storing data with some storage provider, you can dial in the ID of that storage provider, you can see what their energy use profile is over time, and if they've bought renewable energy, you can then download the actual certificate proving that they've bought renewable energy, not just in general, but from a specific solar or wind or hydro producer in a region nearby that Filecoin storage provider. And you can actually see how much renewable energy was purchased in order to store my files, and where was it purchased from, who was it purchased from, what type of energy was it. And so these are the sorts of tools we're talking about, right? We're using this verifiability that we get by building all of these systems, so Filecoin especially, using this Web3 native paradigm, and we're then connecting it in a granular, verifiable way to actual renewable energy purchases. And so that's a big part of what we're doing is doing the both research and implementation of those sorts of tools in order to allow us to be very granular and verifiable about our environmental claims. And then we're taking the next step also, which is allowing storage providers to go the sort of the next step, right? To not just make proofs based on the blockchain, but also to submit information and allow them to make more granular, detailed claims. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, totally. And before I dive into that, I just want to double click on a few things that you just said. Plugged it. Because we are very proud, through the work that we've done on creating this energy use model in the dashboard, to be able to say that we've made Filecoin the world's most transparent major blockchain when it comes to electricity use. And we think that's incredibly, incredibly important, because when you're trying to assess the environmental impact of blockchain networks, if you only see that a node in that network every time they win a block reward, then you really need to rely on a techno-economic model to assess network activity, such as how many miners are actively mining, what their hash rate is, and what their hardware configuration is. But because with Filecoin we have these on-chain proofs of the storage capacity or of the computational resources contributed to the network on a continuous basis, we can turn those into very granular data about the network energy use and turn it into these very awesome dashboards that we've developed, the team has developed, to explore this information over time. So back to your point about the way in which, actually, another point, with regard to the connecting to the renewable energy, we are incredibly committed to decarbonizing the Filecoin network in record time. And as a testament to that commitment, right now, Protocol Labs and the Filecoin Foundation are currently procuring enough RECs to match to the upper bound energy use estimate of the entire network this calendar year. To date, we've reached more than the middle line estimate.
About the estimate, yeah.
Yeah, and anticipate reaching that upper bound energy use estimate, which is significantly higher than the actual use of the network by the end of Q3 2022, or 2022, this year. So what that means is that by the end of next quarter, the entire Filecoin network will run exclusively on renewable energy. Yeah, huge thing there. Now, to your point, it's certainly not our intention to continuously procure RECs on behalf of the network. That is surely a very cost-efficient way to run out of money. But we want to develop guidance, and we have developed guidance, to suggest how storage providers, all of the individual storage providers, can decarbonize their operations in a very rigorous and comprehensive way. So we've spent a lot of time developing guidance documentation that's intended to identify and define a ton of best practices in terms of greenhouse gas accounting, renewable energy procurement, and a slew of related topics to help them move towards that more sustainable future. And to go above and beyond that, because we recognize that just providing this guidance documentation may not be enough to incentivize them and drive this collective action that we're really seeking to achieve, we have also proposed something called the Filecoin Green Pledge, which is a kind of a first of its kind pledge that storage providers can commit to showcase their commitment to decarbonizing their operations across their global operations. And really what that means, as a storage provider, if you want to adhere to the Filecoin Green Pledge, then you need to meet certain requirements and certain reporting requirements, if they will. The overarching theme is to get them to procure renewable energy for at least 80% of their energy use needs by the end of fiscal year 2023. And then to ratchet that up and meet 100% of their energy use needs by end of fiscal year 2025 and maintain that threshold from there on. And what all that means is that in combination with our efforts that Protocol Labs and Filecoin Foundation are doing right now to procure the RECs on behalf of the network, in combination with the Filecoin Green Pledge, we're very, very confident that not only will the network run exclusively on renewable energy, but will be 100% carbon neutral by the end of fiscal year 2025. And to the guidance specifically, we recognized very quickly that we needed to provide this guidance to showcase how people can decarbonize their operations, because unfortunately it's not, decarbonizing an operation is not a straightforward manner. The kind of standard go-to approach for decarbonizing something is to quantify your impact by conducting a greenhouse gas emissions calculation, then seek every possible way that you can to mitigate and reduce those emissions. And then if there are any emissions unaccounted for that you were not able to reduce and mitigate, then you seek to procure high-quality offsets to fill that very, very small remainder, that gap. However, 99 times out of 100, corporate actors, sometimes countries and individual consumers, do a very hand-wavy carbon accounting exercise, skip that middle and crucial step, and just procure a bunch of low-cost offsets. And with low cost generally comes low quality. Therefore, they're not actually mitigating the emissions that they calculated in this hand-wavy exercise. So we provided this very detailed guidance to ensure that they are doing everything under the sun that they can to reduce emissions in a transparent and verifiable manner.
And I think, again, that really highlights how we're able to work with environmental data in Web 3 in ways that are very difficult or impossible in Web 2. right? We're reaching into the network. We're trying to understand in a granular and verifiable way exactly what is happening in that network, exactly what are those environmental impacts, and then not just jumping to an overall offset calculation, but trying to one by one, node by node, reduce those environmental impacts. If you're interested in this sort of philosophy, I'd point you to a great book called Why Net Zero Is Not Enough by Holly Jean Buck. The point is that if you imagine a world in a few decades in which the world is net zero emissions, because we emit a lot of carbon and then we pull a lot of carbon out of the air, that's a very different world from one in which we are net zero because we don't emit carbon, right? So when you're emitting carbon, you are solidifying this fossil fuel supply chain that's causing pollution, it's causing environmental degradation, it's causing all sorts of effects other than just the carbon, right? And so we really believe that we have this opportunity to rebuild how our economy processes environmental information, and we need to do that in a Web3 native way, allowing us to look at effect by effect and reduce that effect. I'm gonna cite one example from the grants program that Orion in in Filecoin Green runs, which is that we gave a grant to a storage provider to put solar on their roof. So this is Descent, which is based in Amsterdam. They now have solar on their roof. And Motza here coded a dashboard in which we can go in and look not just at the PDU measurements to look at what the actual measurements of energy use in this data center are, hour by hour or 15 minutes by 15 minutes, but then also see correspondingly what the output from the solar cells on their roof is. So we can actually see day by day, hour by hour, 15 minutes by 15 minutes, how much electricity are they getting from the grid and how much are they producing locally themselves. And we really see the opportunity, right, to rebuild this world in which that is the level of granularity and detail that we can use to assess environmental claims. And so what else are we covering?
I was going to say, that's one example of the ways in which we're trying to catalyze this nascent space of environmental Web3 projects. We also just ended our hackathon. Our Sustainable Blockchain Hackathon ended yesterday. I think it was 10 a.m. Paris time, CET, 8 a.m. UTC. And we were just overwhelmed with the amount of participation and the great projects that came out of it. I think we had 280 different people, something like 89 different projects that were submitted in our very first hackathon, all of which were unbelievable use cases centered around a short list of problem statements or challenge statements that we proposed to them to help us develop some of these tools to better monitor and report the environmental impact or the electricity use, environmental impact of Web3 operations. And in tandem with that hackathon, right, that's the first hackathon that we run, but we're also hosting the Sustainable Blockchain Summit later this week.
And so the Sustainable Blockchain Summit is a cross-network collaboration in order to bring together people who want to build Web3 native tools to make sustainability claims as transparent as possible. So really, really buy into that vision of trying to understand what are our environmental impacts in this granular, detailed, verifiable way. Show me the data. If you make a sustainability claim, if you say you're really sustainable, show me the data actually backing that up. Prove to me that that data is correct. And then let's rebuild how we apply the greenhouse gas protocol to the economy. I think to sort of wrap up, one of the ways of seeing, right, the power of building this in an automatic and verifiable way compared to the standard now is that currently, when a company wants to prove or say they're sustainable, they hire an auditor. That auditor goes through all their books, tries to understand what are their emissions, where do those emissions come from. They look at receipts, they look at transportation, they look at products purchased, and they try to understand what overall is the sustainability profile or the emissions profile of this company. That takes a long time, right? And so companies frequently only publish this information once a year. And so if that company that just published is one of my suppliers, right, and then I use their data, that data is already months old by the time it gets to me. And so if I then ingest that data for my own emissions report, right, then I take another year in order to determine my sustainability profile, and then I don't publish that for another however many months. And every stop along this value chain takes another year. And if the IPCC says we need to decarbonize by 40% in about 8 years to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, having a supply chain that takes a year per hop along that supply chain in order to determine just the basic data about what your emissions profile is just not going to fly, right? So that's the vision that the Sustainable Blockchain Summit is organized around, is bringing people together who have a deep expertise in Web3, people who have deep expertise in environmental accounting, and really looking at how can we build a version of the greenhouse gas protocol that is Web3 native that allows us to take this information and pass it through the economy in minutes, not in months. So that's going to be happening this Friday and Saturday. Please go to sbs.tech if you want more information about it or to sign up to come.
And use that code for 20% off.
Yeah, exactly.
See you Friday.
Awesome.